with Sree and Sree, episode 215. We have a lot to cover and shall jump straight to global news. Iran TV report states that attack on Israeli ship was revenge for Syria raid. Israel knows with certainty Iran attacked the Mercer Street ship and will respond to it. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said on Sunday. UK confirms that it's highly likely that Iran was responsible for the attack on Israeli oil tanker. US asserts that it was the Iranian drone that was involved in the attack. Bennett's remarks came after Iran denied involvement in Friday's bombing off the coast of Oman, a move that the Prime Minister called cowardly. So, your thoughts on how this is going to play out? What is going to be Israel's response? And welcome to the new format where we are now beaming live across new platforms such as LinkedIn, sir.
Good morning to, congratulations to PGurus team. Good morning to everybody, and we kick off another week. The month of August has commenced. Today is the 2nd. Well, with regard to this alleged Iranian drone attack on the commercial ship that was making its voyage from Britain to Israel, which was attacked just off Arabian Sea. Now US, UK, and set of allies are confirming and basically reaffirming that it looks like the evidence is that it's an Iranian attack. You will see I think there would be some form of retaliation. What it would be, we would not know, but Israel will not let these kinds of things go away.
And America's top envoy for the nuclear negotiations with Iran, Rob Maley, is having increasing doubts about whether a return to the 2015 JCPOA agreement is even possible. Senators want Biden to deny visas to Iranian diplomats attending the UN session. So the UN session usually takes place in September, right?
Yes, I think they're advancing the UN session by virtue of various events from pandemic to other types of events that is confronting the world. Now, with regard to the Iranian deal, it is Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action (JCPOA) signed by P5+1 countries in 2015, July 2015, during the Obama years. That looks like that may not, fructify given the way Iran is dragging itself, plus continuing to enrich the uranium, which is beyond the threshold of what was signed in JCPOA. So now we're getting the news that things are not moving. Things are unlikely to go in a positive direction. The U.S. GOP senators are now raising their arms and saying the only way you can is to block the Iranian delegates coming in to attend the UN session.
And 3 rockets strike Kandahar airport as Taliban intensifies strikes against the Afghan government. Disturbing videos emerging with Taliban imposing Sharia law in parts of Afghanistan. Sridharji, this was expected. So why is it coming now as a surprise, sir?
It's just a reporting of incidents that is taking place. I don't believe there's any surprise. I think that there was hope that the Taliban would negotiate and come to some kind of a negotiated power sharing agreement within the constitutional framework of Afghanistan. Many countries support that, but the challenge here is whether Taliban would would abide by that is a question mark. But based on all the incidents, it looks like they are on their way to do their own things.
And US issues new sanctions on Cuban regime and says more to come while continuing to deny access to fleeing Cuban refugees. So I have a problem with this. Why isn't the US being consistent? Either you take in all refugees or you turn away all refugees, or you apply the law and make sure that whatever it is, it's being consistently applied.
I don't know. Law of irrationality applies probably here. So if you happen to be coming from the southern borders, doesn't matter whether you're COVID infected, not COVID infected, etc. You are allowed to come from the Central American republics. Wade through. You will be given buses. You will be given cars. You will be chartered. Blah blah blah. And you don't even need to be going through any kind of affirmation program that you will turn up in courts and you move through. whereas you have these all these people who are battling communism in Cuba and being subjected to regressive measures are being sent back. Only implies that they don't want to be probably antagonistic to their comrades. That's all I can think of. The fellow comrades in Cuba. So they don't. That's. I mean, it's that's the only conclusion that one can make. In historically, Cuban refugees have been supported. Miami has a lot of them, but this particular regime seems to be taking a very different approach.
And Nigeria receives 4 million COVID doses from US and proposed US arms sale to Nigeria on hold due to human rights concerns. Egypt is closely following the political turmoil in Tunisia in the wake of its president's decision to seize exceptional powers. Egyptian and Algerian foreign ministers met to discuss the Tunisian situation. Tunisia is where the Arab Spring started, and looks like now there's a fair amount of churn inside Tunisia. Your thoughts, sir?
So my thoughts are, if you get a chance, you should look at the map. Tunisia is right at the epicenter in the Mediterranean. So you have Tunisia adjacent to that is the Algeria, and then Egypt is on the other side of the border. So anything that's happening there has a tumultuous consequences into the adjacent states. And so Egypt is taking a much more closer view, and the foreign ministers of the two adjacent border states have met, and Egypt seems to be taking a much more proactive approach in resolving a number of issues, not just the Tunisian, but also working on the Gaza as well as the Palestinian, and they also seem to be taking some interest on the Syrian side, on the Israeli challenges, Israeli border challenges that Israel is facing. So at least there is a proactive engagement from Egypt. Yes, you are right. The Arab Spring started in Tunisia, and so there's a concern that this cannot have spill-on effects. As far as the Nigeria is concerned, US is very concerned that Boko Haram is extremely active. While they are sympathetic to granting the vaccines for the vaccination program, their concern stems from the fact that if you give them the arms, whether there's the excessive force used the opposite way. But either way, I think that's another area where there's a lot of instability caused by terrorism-related activities.
Myanmar's military ruler Min Aung Hlaing promised new elections 6 months after seizing power. He then elected himself as the interim prime minister. COVID Delta variant continues to ravage across Asia as Thailand contemplates further restriction. So first, Myanmar. This person, is he another general who has grabbed power, sir?
He is the general who has grabbed power, who is responsible he is the military general who is responsible, who has pretty good relationship with China, pretty good relationship with Russia. Also has pretty good relationship with the ASEAN members. He met with the Indonesian foreign minister in Jakarta. He has also met with the Thai. So ASEAN is insisting that they will have to do and resolve this within the framework of the ASEAN rather than getting external members involved. So he says, there's a lot of corruption in the prior election. So we have assumed power. We will conduct the elections. Let us see how ASEAN reacts to this thing. The COVID situation continues to, for example, Thailand is one, but there's also Vietnam, and there's Tokyo notwithstanding the fact there's modest increase, nothing into the Olympic Village. They've also imposed sanctions. Asia continues to battle the Delta variant. That is the latest hotspot in the world. And I think soon it may be United States.
And our freedom is in danger. It is not government business to decide what we should and should not do. Protests erupt all across Europe over passports and mandates. Europe is still in the grip of the pandemic, and now these protests are erupting. Wouldn't that make it worse? I mean, we know that Delta spreads even faster than the previous variants. Why are Europe doing these things? Is this synchronized? Because I see some sort of a synchronized thing going on. Suddenly there is an activity in the 3I. There's activity also in the Sahel region, Mediterranean, Europe. And what is the game plan here? Who do you think is behind all this orchestration?
There seem to be what you call, unfortunately, coincidental, but at least the Sahel region and the Three Eyes, there's a consistent pattern there, which is the battle between the terrorist forces and the appropriate elected governments in those places that one can attribute. As far as the Europe is concerned, the protests are stemming from the fact that for too long there's been lockdown. There's no credible person who is standing up and giving, what is the exact situation and how the situation is going to be resolved. It's the same as in the United States, because I'm sure people are aware that vaccines are not yet fully approved. They are under still emergency approval. Every day you have inconsistent, messages that are coming out. So that makes people wonder as to when you can't guarantee and when you can't be very specific, why are you insisting that we have to do this and we have to do that? Managing risk of my life is this. Okay, you want to test me and you find you want to quarantine me, I'll do this. But don't insist on something that you cannot guarantee, but you want me to be injected into my body. That seems to be the overarching motive, even here in the United States. And that seems to be spreading to Europe.
And Sky News Australia has been suspended by YouTube. What was the reason for this? Is Sky News a right-wing channel?
Yeah, Sky News is Rupert Murdoch's channel. So I think that I think the issue is around this. They say that inconsistent information around these vaccines, because even in Australia, there is a lot of resistance in vaccines. So they are highlighting the information, and which YouTube looked at as it is discrepant to what the established norms are. So therefore, they have imposed the ban. So in other words, you are trying to spread something that prevents people from getting mainstream. So that seems to be the motive. Whether that is the case or not is a subject of conjecture. And we all have seen these tech platforms being at the centerpiece of controversy.
And let's take a look at US news now. According to an independent study, most Georgia voters did not sufficiently check their paper ballots in 2020. Pennsylvania senator prepares to issue subpoenas after 3 counties reject audit requests. Forensic audits commence in Wisconsin. President Biden and congressional Democratic leaders, stymied by Republican opposition to their partisan voting rights bills, agreed Friday to keep pushing for legislation. The nationalization of election standards and the abolishing of voter ID. This is a step in the reverse direction, sir. We want a voter ID, a confirmed voter ID for everyone who can vote.
Well, first and foremost, this whole piece reflects that this election battle continues. The fact that more and more forensic audits are being conducted is causing alarm bells in the present administrative setup in Washington, D.C. Is obviously the government in power is Democrats. Both control the House, have a tie-breaking majority with the vice president in the Senate, and then of course the president is from there. So they believe that the issue has to be resolved. The only way they can resolve the issue is by bringing everything under federal control. As far as the voter ID is concerned, they believe that they have consistently maintained, if you happen to be in this country and if you have to be if you are counted in the census, which they seems to have successfully once Trump won, who should be in census, and then Biden came and appealed, and then he seems to have got his consent on this. The story is that they want everybody to be counted. So in other words, if you happen to be in this country, therefore you are entitled to vote. This is where this whole streams and surge of illegal aliens coming in begs the question as to why these people are being allowed to come in. There is also an amnesty program besides the DACA that they're attempting to introduce via this infrastructure bill, all to ensure that all these guys get counted, notwithstanding the fact that they are by constitution not citizens, because the citizenship process takes a fair amount of time before they're given. But they want these people to be included. That seems to be the agenda.
An eviction moratorium to end after Congress fails to extend it. This is a big one. Illinois rental housing providers welcome the end of election moratorium. I think this is eviction moratorium. I read it wrong. So, your thoughts? I think it had to come to an end one day.
It has to come to an end right now. This morning, breaking news: the amount of losses that the homeowners have incurred is 15 billion on unpaid rent. Okay, whether it is to up to what date we don't know. We'll clarify, but 15 billion. But we are willing to pay $100 billion or hundreds of billions of dollars for these illegal aliens coming in. But for the guys who are the citizens of this country, who are renting their premises to a number of people, they are not entitled to rent, and the cost of that is $15 billion, and there is no US program to support it. So therefore you can see the state of Illinois has basically said no, the moratorium not go on, and people cannot be denied their right to collect the rent. So it's a very interesting situation. Actually July 31st the moratorium ended, and there is Democratic, the progressive group has done is launching an agitation by sitting in the Capitol Hill and so on and so forth. The story is that where this is going to go, we don't know, but the losses are common sense tells you that the people here cannot bear losses anymore, and there has to be, if the people are not willing to pay rent because of the situation, then the government has to step in, as they have done in other cases.
And 3I stands for Israel, Iran, and Iraq. And thanks for asking that question. One of our viewers wanted to know. And these are all things that are coined by DGI, and these are becoming popular now. There's the other one called Sahel, Sahel. It refers to a region in Africa where there is a lot of unrest. We've been covering this in in extensive detail in many of our DGI hangouts. Dangerous precedent, according to Grassley, on Justice Department ordering of release of President Trump tax returns. This is very, very interesting, sir. Now they are asking to unseal Trump tax returns. What is the benefit out of this? I don't know.
Political mileage, simple. Okay, as to how he has filed the returns, what the issues were, and where he filed bankruptcy, where he didn't file bankruptcy, what is the income calculated, what is the income written off, a whole gamut. So the thing here is, whichever way you want, we want to slice and dice President Trump. So, but anyway, there's a good news and a bad news. The good news is that this thing will put on the table. The bad news is now it's only a matter of time before Republicans repeat it. That's it. So therefore, this drama continues. So we are more into drama rather than looking at a number of challenges that United States is confronted with geopolitically, domestically, and economically.
And Biden and the Department of Justice are going to sue Texas on border crackdown on illegal aliens. In a bipartisan letter, Graham and Coyer urge Biden to hire J.E.H. Johnson as the border czar. Biden administration not disclosing whether illegal immigrants are being tested for COVID-19. The information that we have was, at least the initial surge, they were not tested. And I'm sure some of the current surge that we are seeing may have had something to do with it. Remember, viewers, that Delta was fairly cordoned off from the United States. So now you have to look at what are the possible ways in which it could have made an entry into the United States. I leave it to you, the viewer, to decide whether it was the influx of the illegal immigrants that may have brought this thing in, especially given the fact that they were not tested. So your thoughts?
Well, I think my thoughts are this whole thing is is going to blow up big time. Texas and Arizona, but Texas is taking a much more proactive approach, which is effectively to state this whole border crossing is illegal, and we're going to enforce the law. And people who are impacted as a result of this are the Texans. If you recall, Mr. DeSantis, the Florida governor, has indicated that, but his own border patrol have stated that many people who are coming and making their way through the southern the southern borders are making their way into Florida, which is also causing an uptick as well as a crime issue. So you have this situation by two governors of two, needless to say, red states raising red flags. So what does the administration do? The administration says they're going to file case, they're going to file an appeal and make sure that the enforcement doesn't happen. Now, this tells you something about the administration versus the states. Okay, if you have illegal surges and you are enforcing, and the federal says, no, you cannot enforce, then what does it tell? I think people can draw their own inferences as to what exactly is the agenda of, you can't enforce, you won't be tested, there are no detention, there's catch and release, and they're, sent all across the country, and it has to be funded through taxpayers' money. So what does this reveal in terms of what the present administration wants to do by way of policy in dealing with this surges that is happening? So people can draw their own conclusions, beyond the political lines.
Sir, who is this individual, Jay Johnson?
He was he was the former Department of Homeland, what you call the Homeland Security Services head in the Trump administration.
See, when a bipartisan request of that nature comes, that usually means that the current DHS is unable to handle the job. My thoughts, sir, I don't know if you see it the same way.
No, Mayorkas has been very clear that, which is namely, he doesn't want to touch this issue, right? He is the Health and Homeland Security Services Secretary. He is very clear. So, because in the absence of any clear enforcement that is coming from the Homeland Security Secretary, then the states have to take their own action, which is what the Texas governor said. Because you're not doing it, and I'm going to do it because it's my state which is impacted, not you.
And Biden administration says national vaccine mandate is not under consideration at this stage. I mean, all these control measures are meaningless if the border continues to seep in people and there is no checks going on as to whether these people are suffering from vaccine or from COVID or not. I mean, we can't emphasize this enough. You can't really control this pandemic when you have all these. It's like a ship taking in water and you are trying to throw water out using buckets. But if you are continuing to take in water, eventually the thing is going to sink. Walt Disney and Walmart joined the list of companies mandating vaccines and masks to returning employees. Confusion and chaos prevails on vaccine mandates and masks across the country. The FDA extends the shelf life of J&J vaccines. Remember, J&J is a single shot. It is a little bit less effective than Pfizer and Moderna, but the fact that it is only one shot makes it very promising. So your thoughts, take away and tell us how you feel this COVID thing is playing out, first in US and then perhaps the rest of the world.
I think that the first and foremost, I think the less speech and more consistency would help in United States, most certainly. In other words, one person says only masks are needed for unvaccinated. Then it says masks are needed even for fully vaccinated in certain areas, both outside and inside, both outdoors and indoors. And then you have another vaccine company stating that even if you're fully vaccinated, the efficacy comes down in 6 months. So therefore, you need a booster dose, which gives you a little bit of, which gives considerable confusion to people. Okay, is this, am I to vaccinate or am I not to vaccinate? If I'm vaccinated, am I immune? And do I still need to follow the protocols of mask and no mask? So if there is a unified message, whatever the message is, which is to say you got to be fully vaccinated, there may be a need for the booster dose that will be assessed, and everybody, irrespective of fully vaccinated or vaccinated, must wear masks. If you're fully vaccinated, you will be allowed to resume normal duties. If you're not fully vaccinated, then you will not be allowed to come back to work or come back into public areas, etc. So if you have one single statement of that ilk which is consistent, then you will be able to get people back online. It is the inconsistent statements that is creating more problem and more nuisance. Now, this is the reason why we have problems in the United States and we have problems in Europe. Whereas if you go across the world, Asia and is following a consistent pattern, which is everybody is getting vaccinated, whatever the government determines, and the vaccine seems to be holding off in terms of the infection rates. The active cases have come down, particularly in right across the Asia, and you have seen some part of it in Israel as well. Um, and the vaccine mandate and the general discipline is being adhered because there's one single consistent message that's coming from the Asian side of the continent. And in the United States, we have another complication, which is namely to state that, hey, the vaccines are only still under emergency approval. They're not fully approved. So for indemnifying the indemnification by the vaccine manufacturers. Today, the vaccine manufacturers are saying, okay, we don't take any accountability as a result of the outcome from being vaccinated. So therefore, we are still only under emergency approval. This is another, rider in the storm, which is effectively to state, hey, why should I get vaccinated when the guy who is manufactured this is not trusting in himself as to the consequences of the collateral consequences of the outcomes. All this is causing confusion. And then we had on a Saturday, Pfizer CEO saying you need a booster. Then you have AstraZeneca CEO saying you don't need a booster, etc. Maybe they are talking about the respective vaccines. AstraZeneca is not used in the United States. Pfizer and Moderna is in use, and J&J is still in the lab.
And the 1.2 trillion infrastructure bill is on track for Senate passage this week, setting the stage for floor action. Next comes Democrats' demands for a follow-up bill that would spend trillions more on childcare, education, and social welfare. The way I see it, sir, this add-on bill is not going to move. I think the Republicans are now really taking a hard line on how much money needs to be spent more, how much more debt you want to load on the back of our younger generation. That's how I see it. So your thoughts?
I think my thoughts are that they will persuade the senators, the Democratic senators will persuade their fellow House members, let's get this done. Irrespective of with or without Republicans, we will get the reconciliation bill and get the 3.5 trillion plus done. So I think that's what is going to happen because they're not going to have 10 Republican senators. This morning, Susan Collins has stated that 10 senators from GOP are likely to vote with the Democrats to get the 1.2 trillion through. So they're going to use a two-step process, and both of this is going to come in. Today is also the day where they have to extend the debt limits. The debt limits goes from $22 trillion to $28.5 trillion, with $6.5 trillion of the debt that we accrued in 2020 till now to be added. This excludes the new 1.2 plus 3.5, whatever the amortization consequences of the 3.5 trillion is.
A law firm has taken legal action on behalf of Minnesotans opposed to critical race theory, CRT, who argue that they have become victims of bullying and retaliation for speaking out against what they say is a divisive and discriminatory philosophy. The CRT is again dividing people, and the way this is being rushed through, I don't know why these priorities are getting mixed up by the current administration. First of all, pandemic has to be the number one priority. Then, opening the door for God knows whose request or what checklist they had, laundry list to please somebody for having helped them to come to power. I don't know what that was, but clearly the priorities are a huge problem with the Biden administration, the way I see it. Sir, I'm trying to find something good to say about this administration. I don't know. Please tell me if there's something good that this administration has done thus far.
There are three good things they're doing, sir. They're piling up the debt of the United States balance sheet. So therefore, they believe that, we can go on adding debt to the balance sheet. Second, we can go on borrowing money to fund every type of program. So there's money in everybody's account. That is those who are taxpayers and those people who are streaming across the borders, depending on the state, they are, being generously rewarded for their settlement allowance or whatever you want to call. And then the third thing is that, that they believe that they're going to borrow at an average $6 trillion per year for the next 4 years. This is Mr. Biden himself. No, if you are a progressive and if you are a liberal, you think that this is great, because the reason is this is what they were saying, which is namely that borrow money so that you can uplift and give us the funds. That's the good thing. The bad thing is who is going to pay and how is it going to pay. That's where the pain comes. The pain is the taxes. But with all these other stuff that we are talking about, critical race theory, voting rights, discrimination, there's one more thing that we haven't, we'll touch on another day, which is what they call as the land rights bill. So that is going to have a lot of land. It's almost like if you are in India, you're probably again, land ceiling act, something similar is akin to come. So it's very, as you rightly say, what is a good thing that you can speak about? The good thing that you can speak about is probably some of the programs like the child credit, like probably the expansion of the Obamacare, care for the elderly, and people who provide support to kids and the elderly, granting them additional leave. So there are several social programs that they are formalizing, which is very good. Minimum wage is another one which one can contest, but at least you can say that is a better outcome for the vast citizens. So there are some, good programs, but rather than doing one after the other in a systematic manner, by lumping all these things, the good from the bad is getting lost in the din.
And we'll be right back after this brief message. Stay tuned. And we are back with India news. CCP uses United Workers Front Department against India in South Asia, as per experts. So, this United Workers Front Department is a part of which government, sir?
No, I think this United is some local left-wing body. For example, if you are aware that the Communist Party congratulated Mr. Xi Jinping for his the 70 years, and they attended the events in the Chinese embassy. It is this left-wing group which seems to have a sympathy towards the communist form and format of governance, some allegiance to the Chinese CCP. So they are likely to use this CCP affiliate to stir up or to get their messages and agenda broadly into the community. If you recall, there was some kind of an agreement also signed by Indian National Congress or the Congress Party with the Chinese government. The exact scope of the MOU, we are not. At least I'm not aware. But this was a point of critique. So you have a number of allies of CCP within India, and this United Workers Front or United seems to be one such specific group.
And military delegates from India and China deliberated for almost 9 hours to resolve the border crisis on Saturday at Moldo on the Chinese side in the Ladakh region. Hot Springs, Gogra, and Depsang plains were part of the discussions. Has India considered its advantage in Greater Kailash Heights? One needs to wait and see, because many people feel that that is the case, that India needlessly withdrew from a point where they had very good view of what the Chinese were up to on their side of the LAC. China has been increasing its military infrastructure across the LAC. Looking at this, India has organized itself from defensive and deterrent posture to attack and strike back solutions. So far, the troops of 2 Himalayan giants have disengaged from both banks of Pangong Tso Lake in February this year. So your thoughts on this whole thing, and should India have voluntarily withdrawn from Kailash Heights, which happened to be within its area? It's not like it was going and straddling into the LAC. I still find that difficult as to why India gave up that bargaining chip.
Well, I think there are two schools, right? As you rightly pointed out, there's one school who believes that India has conceded ground. The other group feels that India has not conceded ground from the strategic vantage point. So, therefore, if somebody is spreading the word that it has lost its negotiating position, it's probably misplaced. Now, what we will know, as you rightly pointed out, we'll probably know the truth sometime very soon. But the most important aspect here is that the re-engagement has commenced. One wonders whether there will be an outcome or this is just another time-wasting ceremony that goes on, because this is after a lapse of considerable time. This 10th session has been conducted. While this 10th session has been during this process, they have also opened up another hotline, I think, which PGurus has also covered in the North
Yes.
Sikkim area. Um, I don't see the way Xi Jinping has positioned himself. He toured the independent Tibetan region. He came very close to Ingchi, which is adjacent to Arunachal Pradesh. He revved up the population in terms of one China, etc. I just don't see this situation getting resolved without some kind of a conflict breaking out. So I think India has equipped itself, recognizing that there is likely to be a conflict. So it is prepared to fight, and it is prepared to hold, and it is prepared to repel, and if required, go in and take land, which is the what belongs to India. So we are almost all set with everything built up with 50,000 troops on either side, and China is building its formidable forces. And we covered earlier in the Daily Global Insights that the China doesn't have any strategic advantage by way of having in this high altitude mountains, planes carrying a heavy payload. So it seems like that there's a lot of saber rattling that is going on, but China is very clear it wants to have a unilateral status quo change, which India is refusing. That only means that it looks like there's a potential conflict.
And as you mentioned, sir, there is Indian Army and Chinese Army have established a sixth hotline in the North Sikkim area. This is between Kongra La in the Sikkim area and Khamba Zong in the Tibetan Autonomous Region. BRICS Counter-Terrorism Action Plan has been finalized at the working group that took place last week under the chairmanship of India. The meet took place on the 28th and 29th of July and was chaired by the Joint Secretary for Counter-Terrorism, Ministry of External Affairs, Mahavir Singhvi. So BRICS is still alive? I thought that it had been long given up.
I don't know. I think BRICS is still alive by name and action. So you have BRICS, you have SCO, you have Quad, you have Quad Plus, then you have NATO, you have NATO Plus. So you have various groups, and then you have United Nations. So very soon we'll have the UN meet. All these different groups. I believe that Quad was the most formidable one, with four major powers with adjacent countries stretching from Indian Ocean on one side to the Pacific on the other side. Was a single consistent body. But now you have all these groups, because the Quad, again, my belief, was replaced. BRICS is no longer relevant because they are such asymmetric economies. South Africa is in deep trouble, both economically, social, as well as the fast-spreading epidemic and civil unrest, etc. So, the word BRICS that was coined in terms of the emerging economies, somehow that has been used as a vehicle. And China and India are, arm wrestling with Russia to hold an advantage. So continuing to hold this BRICS, when you have SCO, where again Russia, China, and India meet, doesn't seem to add any weight or any credibility to this particular group. But it is there, and people are meeting.
And PM Modi, to be the first prime minister to chair UNSC meeting, informed Syed Akbaruddin. UNSC, India is still not a member, not a permanent member at least. So what is the significance here, sir?
I think it is by 2 years it gets its turn to be the permanent, one of the members of the, 5+10, which is 15. India also holds the chairmanship for this particular period. So which is very laudable. And I think India is making its way to establish itself as a consensus builder in solving the issues. I think that we discussed it in the last week's Daily Global Insights, that what the three priorities were: COVID, terrorism, and also the impending economic pandemic crisis, plus some of the geopolitical threats would be the four areas of focus that they are looking at as part of the next session.
The uptick in GST revenue in June and July reflects a growing momentum in GDP. Eight core sectors are up by 8.9% in June and had contracted 12.4% in June 2020. So from a minus 12.4 to a plus 8.9, that is a 20% shift. According to the CEA, KV Subramaniam, inflation will moderate to 6% in July. According to the Commerce Secretary Piyush Goyal, the growing services sector revenue forms the basis for Indo-US business ties. Foreign exchange reserves are down by 1.581 billion to 611 billion currently. So, your thoughts on ongoing trade things that are happening in and around India?
The India is expanding its trade using what you call opportunistic and bilateral engagement. If you recall that India has is working on a deal with EU on the trade and investment side. India is working on a deal with UK, which they probably are close to signing. And India is encouraging what they call as the Indian Ocean region, which is close to about $400 billion or $440 billion of trade in the region. So they're trying to, figure out and form appropriate partnerships so they can inject the appropriate capital and build the trade momentum. One of the things that we have alluded to is that the exports has been the benchmark in terms of, uptick in the GDP. When the markets have the domestic markets have been closed due to the pandemic second wave. So the U.S. This is immediately after Mr. Blinken's visit. So Mr. Goyal is saying that the services sector would form the beachhead for the expansion of the U.S. ties, which is pretty good if that is the case. I mean, IT is one of the good example of India exports significant amount of IT services to the United States.
India to bring in national farmers database and to bring in data policy for farming sector. And let's take a quick look at markets. Stock markets continue to grind sideways as markets look for next push higher. Crude oil markets continue to show strength over the weekend as the price band is in the $74 to $75 range. Any idea on how the futures are looking today, sir?
I haven't seen the futures market, but they were steady. There was no uptick in the markets. The Friday was a down market, as you all know. So it's continuing to be operating around that, which is the reason why we said that it is likely to move sideways until it finds the next inflection point for the uptick. But having said that, the markets are all up 14+% year to date. So they're way up. In terms of the targets. All tech companies have reported revenues, all look quite positive. The oil sector seems to be again on the uptick. They're not 76, but they're operating the 74, 75 band. That is very much reflected around the world at the gas stations when you go and fill up your cars with fuel. So that's the market situation. But we'll have a lot more news on earnings as well as what's happening to the debt limit and the infrastructure bill. That may be another trigger point for us seeing an uptick because it's cash into the hands of the people.
And with that, we bring to an end today's Daily Global Insights. We'll be back tomorrow, bright and early, same time, same channels. Thanks for joining, and do share, join and retweet our links on whichever platform it is that you are watching. And thanks for your support. Namaskar. See you tomorrow, Siddharji.
Thank you. Namaskar. And have a wonderful day or wonderful evening wherever you are.